Jai, Tosi Maharani ki Jai. We offer our most respectful obeisances unto all the rights of the devotees of the Lord, who just like desire trees, fulfill the desires of everyone, and they are full of compassion for the fallen, conditioned souls.
Better with the translation is where our slow is going to be there.
For the fallen, but not for the demigods. They're fallen, but not as fallen. What? Yeah, just put it on me. Don't worry. I just have to show it. Hare Krishna. Let's go. All right. Okay. Did you make that yourself? No. Right. Ready to go. All right. Ready. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunya Bihari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunya Bihari. Gopijana Balaba Kirivaradhaje. Gopijana Balaba Kirivaradhaje. Yashodanandana Brachajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Brachajana Ranjana. Jamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunya Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunya Bihari. Gopidana Vallabha Girivardhari. Gopinana Balaba Idibadodare Yasudananda Brajajana Ranjana Yasodhanandana Vrajachana Ranjana Jamuna Ravana Chari Yamuna Ravana Chari Jayaranu Madhava Kunjabikahote Jayaranu Madhava Kunjabikahote Madhava Kunjabikahote Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravidikacharya also Teta Sitashi Shimad His Divine Grace Abhaya Charanara Bhaktivedanta Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Anantakoti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Param Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shidwaita Gadadha Shivasati Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radhakrishna Gopi Gopinath Shaim Kun Radhakunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavanam Ki Jai Maturanam Ki Jai Jagadadha Swami Ki Jai Yamunamari Ki Jai Srimati Lasadevi Ki Jai Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Gaur Premananda Hari Hari Bol All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories the assembled devotees, all glories the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Gaur Premananda. Namam Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale, Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namani Namaste Saraswati Devi, Gauravani Pracharani Nirvashesha Shinyavati Paschatadeshatarni. So today we are reading from the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 22, texts 31 to 32, and we're just going to do 31 responsively. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hey, Stoka, Krishna, Hey, Angsho, Sridaman, Subarjuna, Vishala, Avishabhaujasin, Deva Prashta, Varutapa, Hey Stoka Krishna, Hey Angsho, Sridaman Subalarjuna, Vishala Vrishabhajasvin, Deva Prashta Varutapa, Hey Stoka Krishna, Hey Angsho, Sridaman Subalarjuna, Vishala Vrishabhajasvin, Deva Prashta Varutapa, Hey Stoka Krishna, hey Angsho, Shri Dhaman Subararjuna, Vishala Vrishabha Jasvin, Deva Prashta Varutapa. Okay.
Hey Stoka Krishna, hey Angsho.
Whoops.
Sridhamam Subhalarjuna. Shala Vrishabhajasvin. Deva Prashta Varutapa.
Okay, and I'll just read the next text and we will do the word by word synonyms. Pashaitan Mahabhagan Paratai Kanta Jivatan Vata Varshata Pahiman Sahanto Varayanti Naha. All right. Hey Stoka Krishna. O Stoka Krishna. Hey Angsho. O Angshu. Sri Daman Subhal Arjuna. O Sri Dama, Subala, and Arjuna. Vishala Vishava Ojasvin. O Vishala Vishava and Ojasvi. Devaprashta Varutapa. O Devaprashta and Varutapa. Pashyata, just see. Etan, these. Mahabhagan, most fortunate. Para for the benefit of others. Ekanta, exclusively. Jivatan, whose life. Vata, the wind. Varsha, rain. Atapa, heat of the sun. Himan, and snow. Snow. There's snow again in Vrindavan. Sahantaha, tolerating. Vadayanti, keep off. Naha, for us. Translation, Lord Krishna said, O Stoka Krishna and Angshu, O Sridhama, Subala, and Arjuna, O Vrishabha, O Jasvi, Devaprashta, and Vadutapa, just see these greatly fortunate trees whose lives are completely dedicated to the benefit of others, even while tolerating the wind, rain, heat, and snow. They protect us from these elements. So you can repeat, Lord Krishna said, O Stoka Krishna and Angshu, O Sridhama and Subala, and Arjuna, O Vrishabha Ojasvi, Devaprashta and Varutapa. Just see these greatly fortunate trees whose lives are completely dedicated to the benefit of others, even while tolerating the wind, rain, heat, and snow. They protect us from these elements. So, purport by the servants of His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada, Lord Krishna was preparing to bestow His mercy on the wives of the hard-hearted, ritualistic brahmanas, and these verses, the Lord indicates that even trees who are dedicated to the welfare of others are superior to brahmanas who are not. Certainly, the members of the Krishna conscious movement should soberly study this point. Very good point. And so, commentaries for the acharyas are really short, so we'll just read that. With the intention of showing that being born as a generous tree is a worthy birth for a gentleman, whereas being born as a miserly Brahmana is useless, Krishna began praising the trees, calling out to his friends, 8 coward boys, beginning with Stoka Krishna, protected Krishna on the 8 sides, and Devaprashta and Vadutapta, functioning as overseer of the arrangement and lookout, served as the upper and lower directions. The 11th person, Bhadrasena, the leader of the coward boys, paying attention to all the details, was situated at a distance. Krishna observed that the trees tolerated rain and other inconveniences, but sheltered others from rain and heat. And Jiva Goswami basically says the same thing. And Sanatana Goswami says the same thing, except there's an umbrella brought in their commentaries. So we're not going to speak about umbrellas today. Anyway, so let's go back to the verse. Anyway, just do Om Gana Timiranda Shah Garanjana Shilakaya Chakshur and Miritam Yena Tasmai Shigurve Namaha. So we're not going to speak about trees either today. Sorry to disappoint you. We're going to speak about the topic of the verse, which is basically compassion and toleration. And I'm going to make reference to a very important verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam, which details a Vaishnava's qualities or ornaments. The reason I'm using the word ornaments is the word in the verse is sadhabhushana. Sadhabhushana means the ornaments of a sadhu. So the verse is as follows. This is, of course, spoken by Lord Kapiladev. Tatikshava kurunika surida sarvadehina majata shatrava shanda shadava sada bhushana. So the first quality of a devotee, because really what is a devotee? I mean, of course, obviously, a devotee is someone who is devoted. Anyami lashita shunyam jnana karmana vritamana kulyena krishnana shilana bhakti rutapam. That's the primary quality. So from that primary quality, the secondary qualities come. So we can not really see so much the anyavi lashita shunyam jnana karmana vritamana kulyena krishnana shilana bhakti rutapam. I mean, it's harder to see that someone has devoid shunya, just like we have this word shunyavadi, nirvishesha shunyavadi paschatya deshatarde, devoid or void or vacant, or in Hindi it means zero. So anyway, so it's hard to see just looking at someone that he's devoid of any desire for jnana karma and avritam, for mental speculation or liberation or gross sense gratification. I mean, sometimes you look at a devotee. I mean, for example, Pundarik Vijayanidhi. And Pundarik Vijayanidhi, what was his quality? He was a pure devotee, but he actually was very opulent. He was sitting on a bedstead. There was, I guess, silk sheets, a 4-poster bed or whatever. And he was chewing betel, and his lips were, I guess, red or whatever it is for the betel nut. And Gadadhar Pandit thought, this guy is like a materialist. So even Gadadhar Pandit was misjudging that particular individual, isn't it? So later on he understood when Mukunda began to sing a wonderful verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam, and Pundarik Vijayanidhi exhibited the different bhavas, that's the Sattvika bhava and Vyabhachari bhava, anyway. So, but the qualities that really shine out that we can see are the ones listed by Lord Kapiladev. And so this is what we should look for with a sadhu. Tatikshava kurunika surida sarvadeyidam ajata shatrava shanta sadhava sadhabhushana. And these qualities, they're generally in relationship to other living entities. They're not just like a selfish quality. Oh, he just like rolls on the ground in ecstasy. I saw tears spurting from his eyes like torrents of rain, or the hair standing on end. It's in relationship to other living entities. So the first quality, and I'm going to give some examples, don't worry, it's not only going to be a philosophical exposition. is titikshava. Oh, it's going to be hard without swallowing the mic, and I haven't eaten prasadam yet today, so I'm not that hungry. Yeah, it's really close. So the first quality is titikshava. Titikshava basically means to tolerate. Just like we hear in the Bhagavad Gita, what is the first lesson? Tam satiksha shaparata patrasparshas takontiya sitoshna sukadukada. But not just tolerate, like the example, was it George Washington or something? He had a bullet taken out of him, and he put another bullet in his teeth. You hear all these examples. Isn't Napoleon too, something like that?
Yeah,
bite the bullet, bite the bullet. So there's a purpose for toleration, and the purpose for toleration is described in the second verse. The second word in the verse is karunika. That means, karunika means merciful. Just like we chant every morning about the Vaishnavas, isn't it? Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu. Kripa Sindhus is basically the same thing. Abhyayivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So that means someone who's merciful. So in other words, the impetus for toleration is mercy. See, I'm just taking the second word and turning it back on the first word. Is toleration because one's feeling great love for other living entities. Of course, we find that example of in Vasudev Dutt, para dukkha dukhi, that he's willing to suffer everybody's karma, or what Jesus Christ, he's taking on, dying for the sins of his disciples, which his disciples, so-called disciples, take advantage of, or think they're taking advantage of. It doesn't work like that. I mean, even let's say if the spiritual master suffers for the offenses of his disciples, if you keep doing, and he purifies the disciples, if you keep doing the offenses, it doesn't work anymore. So, all right, one time he gave me initiation, and he had a bad dream that night. Gorillas came out, or Dracula, or Batman. Oh, not Batman. Anyway, that's Gopal's favorite person. But then now you keep doing those sins. That's not very good. So anyway, but he tolerates. I mean, look at Haridas Thakur tolerating being whipped at 22 marketplaces like that. Oh my God, I'm feeling compassion to the people who are. So Titikshava Kurunika. And then the next verse, Suridas Sarvadenam. He doesn't distinguish, like Vidya Vinaya Sampane Brahmani Gavihashtani Shuni Chaiva Swapaki Cha Pandita Samadarshana. He sees all living entities equally. Suridam Sarvabhutanam. So that's also about Krishna. It's the same thing. That he's the well-wisher of all living entities. Titikshava Kurunika. So he doesn't distinguish any living entities. And that Ajata Shatrava, and that's also another point in that particular verse. Well, Ajata Shatrava means he whose enemy is never born. So all these different qualities that are listed are actually in relationship to other living entities. It's interesting. The qualities of a Vaishnava, Ajata Shatrava, Shanta, he's peaceful. And this... these are his ornaments. These are the ornaments of a sadhu. So we see many examples of this. I was listening to a class this morning, and Prabhupada was mentioning how Lord Chaitanya exhibited this particular quality. And what was the way, or at least the way that Prabhupada was talking about that Lord Chaitanya exhibited this particular quality, is that Lord Chaitanya renounced his hearth and home when he had a wonderful, submissive wife. That may be an oxymoron. Anyway, so he had a wonderful wife and a mother and everything that, because that's really what gives happiness in this material world. Happiness doesn't come because of money. Happiness comes, according to Prabhupada, society and friendship and love. Prabhupada was quoting someone. Divinely bestowed upon man by God, divinely bestowed upon man by God. So, when one has like friends and associates, just like we hear, Dadati pratigurnati guhyamakyati prichati. Same thing amongst the devotees. We're all looking for nice, loving relationships. Apart from the fact that we don't want to be in pain in our physical bodies and things like that. But really, happiness comes from being surrounded by people who have loving relationships. And that's one reason why people are so miserable nowadays, because basically they don't have these relationships. They're separated, of course, and of course they have loving relationships over Zoom at this particular point, which really doesn't suffice. Or money tries to substitute, or they use money to substitute for loving relationships like that. So anyway, so Lord Chaitanya gave that up. And basically he just left, took sannyas for the benefit of others. And of course I know there's esoteric reasons. I'm just giving the exoteric reason for Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taking sannyas. Or you have the example of Lord Ram. I mean, Lord Ram, in order to carry out his duties as a king, he sent his wife away. And, that appears to be very cruel. But Prabhupada commented that when one becomes a king or a leader, one has to consider everyone in his kingdom. He uses the word praja. Means those people who are born in the kingdom, including the animals. One has to consider equal as far as giving one's attention, mercy, and compassion to. I mean, even there's that story in the Ramayana, how Lord Ram punished a Brahmin for offending a dog. I'll tell it real quickly. The dog came to the door of the castle, started to bark and complain. They let him in. Lakshman let him in. And they asked, what's the problem? And the dog said, this Brahmana had beaten me. And Lord Ram said, call the Brahman. The Brahmana came. And he said to the Brahman, would you beat this dog? And the Brahmin said, yes, I beat the dog because I was hungry. You have low blood sugar and stuff like that. Sometimes, people get like that. So that wasn't a good excuse. And Lord Ram said, what should we do with the Brahmin? And the dog, after some discussion, said, I have a suggestion. And the dog said, make him, don't want to say temple president, but make him in charge of the yatra. And everyone was shocked. And the reason was that the dog became a dog because he was previously the temple president, and he took all the karma of everybody in the temple, everybody in the yatra. Anyway, so the point is the justice was dispensed equally to everybody. And Lord Ram did not consider a Brahmin more worthy of getting proper justice than a dog or a Shudra. And there's other examples that are even more striking. One example I was thinking of was the example of Ranti Dev. Everyone's heard of Ranti Dev? He and his family were fasting. I don't know why they were fasting that long. It was like 48 days. I mean, it's not mentioned why they were fasting. Now, sometimes these great kings, they would do these fasts, like a Kadashi fast for several Kadashis. Just like you have your Bhishma Panchaka, isn't it? So, but Kali Yuga, we should put our attention to helping others. That's really the point, because that's Kali Kalera Dharma Krishna Nama Sankirtan. That in this age of Kali, there is Ekon Dharma. That's mentioned in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. That one Dharma, which is Krishna Nama Sankirtan, which is being compassionate, which is why Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took sannyas, and also why Srila Prabhupada didn't advocate or didn't execute any of these severe austerities we hear people doing, right? He just did whatever is necessary in order to spread Krishna consciousness. It meant eating on Ekadashi. He ate on Ekadashi. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. There's at least one example of how he fed one of his disciples who wasn't feeling well, was Ekadashi, and it was time to preach. He had his disciple eat rice. So really, that's the stress, especially in Kali Yuga, just this compassion following in the footsteps of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So anyway, so we started talking about Ranti Devi, which is a really interesting story. So after 48 days, you get kind of hungry. They had prepared nice food with ghee, pakoras, wheat rice, halva, whatever else. And then all of a sudden he got ready to eat, and a Brahmin came. Brahmin said, "I'm hungry." He said, "All right, here, take a half of it." And then after that, a Shudra came, and he gave some to him. Then a man with dogs came, and he gave the rest to him. And then he thought, well, at least I got some water to drink. And then what happened after that? A Shudra came, or Chandal, or something like that, and he gave him the water. And he had nothing. And here's a quote. I wrote down this quote, which is really interesting. That really summarizes and shows us what the extent of a devotee's compassion is. This is a quote from Ranti Devi, from the Bhagavatam. "I do not pray to the Supreme Personality of Godhead for the 8 perfections of mystic yoga, nor for salvation from repeated birth and death. I only want to stay among all living entities and suffer all distresses on their behalf, so that they may be freed from suffering." And of course, those particular individuals that approached him, the Brahman, the Shudra, the man with the dogs, and the Chandala, and all that other, they were demigods. So this is a test. I don't think any of us would be ready to take that test. Another example given in this regard is, of course, Maharaj Shivi, right? Maharaj Shivi, there was a pigeon and a hawk, and the hawk was chasing the pigeon, and the pigeon took shelter of him. This also shows that if someone takes shelter of you, you cannot neglect them under any circumstances. So the pigeon took shelter and said, "Please save me." And the hawk said, "You're the king. You're supposed to provide for me too. You can't just protect him, and you're doing me an injustice." And then Maharaj Shivi said, "All right, I'll offer you some of my flesh." So he began to tear off. So much compassion. You think about it, it's just wow. So much compassion that he began to tear off pieces of his flesh. And it was actually put on a scale next to the pigeon. So, you're just going to get equal amount of flesh, not more, as they say, a pound of flesh. So equal amount of flesh. So he kept putting the flesh, and the pigeon was always lower, and the flesh just wasn't balancing the pigeon. And finally he got ready to put himself on it. And then the hawk and the pigeon revealed who they were, and that was Agni and Indra. And they blessed him. And this was a test. And then another example of this compassion, because this is what, ultimately, if we really want to please Krishna, we have to come. Obviously it's not going to be such a big test like we're talking about Ranti Devi or like that, but it is a test. We have to be ready to sacrifice everything for the welfare of others and tolerate Titikshava Kurunika. Because without Titikshava, you cannot be Kurunika. And without Kurunika, you cannot be Titikshava. There has to be a motivation or a purpose or a reason. So, about the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, I was also thinking about this, and I wrote down one verse in glorification of the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, which is from the Goswami Ashtaka. It's a beautiful verse written by Srinivasacharya. Chakva Tornamasesha Bandalapati Shrenim Siddhatujvat Bhutva Dina Ganeshako Karudaya Kopina Kanta Shrato Gopi Bhava Rasamrata Pati Lahari Kalola Magno Muhur Bande Rupa Sanatano Rago Yago Sri Jiva Gopalago. And the translation is, I offer my respectful obeisances unto the 6 Goswamis, namely Srila Rupa Goswami, anyway, I want to get to more, so I'm not going to go through the whole list, who kicked off all association of aristocracy as insignificant in order not because they simply wanted to do that. In order to deliver the poor conditioned souls, they accepted loincloths, treating themselves as mendicants, but they were always merged in the ecstatic ocean of the gopis' love for Krishna and bathe always and repeatedly in the waves of that ocean. In other words, I'm taking from this that if you actually dedicate yourself for the welfare of others, and actually Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, he says, he who preaches or teaches this Krishna consciousness in the Bhagavad Gita is most dear, and there will never be more dear than he who does that, he or she, who does that, then that will bring you to the point of bathe always and repeatedly in the waves of that ocean of the ecstatic ocean of the gopis' love for Krishna. So really, that's the point. And so compassion, of course, compassion begins at home. It's not that, we're just like nasty to each other and we go out in Sankirtan, but it's, dadati pratigranati guyamakyati prichati bhunkte bhojyate chaiva. So we have to have loving relationships amongst each other. I mean, last night I was dealing with some situation in some other country where the devotees were at each other's throats, and I had to suggest mediation because I can't do anything over the internet or over the phone or whatever like that. So, that's not pleasing to Krishna. And they're fighting over the deities. Really fighting over who's going to do this with the deities or that with the deities, So what's the priority? Kanishta Adhikari sees Krishna what? On the altar, and then everywhere else. As soon as you walk out of the temple room, that's it. So what's the priority? Priority should be with the devotees, the relationships. I mean, that's something that people really need to get more than anything else. And there was another story I wanted to tell before I end class, which is perhaps the most important instructive story that I've ever read about sacrificing yourself and your body and everything for the welfare of others. This is a story from the 6th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. It involves the sage Dadichi. And Dadichi, he had strong bones because he'd been chanting the Rayana Kavacha mantra for a long period of time. And his bones, certainly didn't have osteoporosis, right? Anyone know what osteoporosis is? No. It means holes in the bones. So he didn't. And his bones were stronger than Indra's thunderbolt. So it was important for Indra to have a thunderbolt made of his bones so that he could free the universe from the torture that this other devotee was doing. That Vritrasura. Vritrasura was a devotee, but he'd been cursed to become a demon. And he tolerated that. He cursed by Durga to become a demon, and it was creating problems. So Indra, in order to help others, saved the universe, basically, from this devotee who was acting as a demon. He had to kill this devotee. And in order to kill the devotee, his ordinary thunderbolt just wouldn't work in this particular case. So he had to get a thunderbolt made from this guy's bones. And if you're going to get a thunderbolt made from someone's bones, that means the person, has to give up his body in order to do that. So the demigods approached this Dadichi to make that request. Can you die for the welfare of others? And Dadichi first, of course, joked with them, and he tested them. He actually said, this is interesting, I'll read some of the quotes. They approached him. Just to hear religious instructions from the demigods, he said, O elevated demigods, at the time of death, severe, unbearable pain takes away the consciousness of all living entities who have accepted material bodies. Don't you know about this pain? In this material world, every living entity is very much addicted to his material body, struggling to keep his body forever. Everyone tries to protect it by all means, even at the sacrifice of all his possessions. Therefore, who would be prepared to deliver his body to anyone, even if it were demanded by Lord Vishnu? This is actually quite interesting. So, the demigods replied, O exalted Brahmana, pious persons like you, whose activities are praiseworthy, are very kind and affectionate to people in general. Why can't such pious souls give for the benefit of others? So this is the test. Not that we have to give up the bones. My bones are not going to make good thunderbolts. So, but really, sacrifice are everything for others' welfare, and beginning with the devotees. So what can such pious, they can give everything, including their bodies. Those who were too self-interested beg something from others, not knowing of others' pain. But if the beggar knew the difficulty of the giver, he would not ask for anything. Similarly, he was able to give charity and does not know the beggar's difficulty, for otherwise he would not refuse to give the beggar anything he might want as charity. Then the great sage Dadichi said, just to hear from you about religious principles, I refuse to offer my body at your request. Now, although my body is extremely dear to me, everybody's attached to the body. It's the instrument. Even if you understand you're not the body, it's dear to you because that's what you're using. Just like I have a Prius, it's dear to me, a car, because I use it to go places. I must give it up for your better purpose, since I know that it will leave me today or tomorrow. O demigods, one who has no compassion, these are really important verses. O demigods, one who has no compassion for humanity and its suffering, does not sacrifice his impermanent body for the higher causes of religious principles or eternal glory, is certainly pitied even by the immovable beings. So that means trees. Getting back to the trees at the beginning, they're saying. So even the trees pity someone who does not sacrifice for the welfare of others, because the trees are sacrificing for the welfare of others, at least those who give shade. If one is unhappy to see the distress of other living beings and happy to see their happiness, his religious principles are appreciated as imperishable by exalted persons who are considered pious and benevolent. And finally, this body, which is eatable by jackals and dogs after death, does not actually do any good for me. The spirit soul is usable only for period. It is usable only for a short time and may perish at any moment. The body and its possessions, its riches and relatives must all be engaged for the benefit of others, or else they will be sources of tribulation and misery. Okay, so we have 1 minute. I have other stories too, but I have thousands of stories, like Prahlad Maharaj's story. I wrote down notes here. Prayers to Lord Nrsingadev, that I don't want anything. I'm just feeling compassion for every Advaita Acharya, feeling compassion. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur chastising his disciples because the disciples didn't give charity to beggars. They were asking for charity because they were prideful. There's another point. Yeah, this is brought out in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. What really interferes with our compassion is pride. That's the 4 principles of religion: cleanliness, mercifulness, truthfulness, and austerity. Mercy is destroyed by pride. By pride, you understand? By pride. Intoxication, but also by pride. So in Kali Yuga, it's intoxication, sorry about that. So intoxication, there's many types of effective intoxication that people are subjected to. One is called the internet. Another one is called alcohol, marijuana, and everything like that. So people are intoxicated. And also, I brought in pride because pride actually, thinking oneself very important, even though that's not mentioned in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, actually leads one to be uncompassionate or not to have compassion for other people. So we should understand that we are 1/10,000th the tip of the hair, we are insignificant, and we are servants of a servant of a servant of the Lord. And what the Lord wants is for us to have compassion and love for others. Okay, on that happy note, all glories to